graduated, I became a secondary school teacher because it was the only thing I ever wanted to do, literally since I could talk. And I worked in comprehensives. It was crazy, but also really fun. And I only stopped because I used to teach languages and I wanted to be able to teach more languages, different ones. So I decided to go to South America and work in this juvenile prison so that I could learn Spanish and Portuguese really quickly. It was actually easier than teaching comprehensives in London, but it was wild. Anyway, came back fully intending to go back into teaching, but actually randomly ended up working at this like philanthropy headhunting thing where I had to work with Alain de Botton to start the School of Life because that's when he was starting it. And then I left that to work for Save the Children because they were one of our clients and they were like, hey, you're the kind of person who we think should be working here. So I went and worked there for a bit in education advocacy. It was really fun. While I was there, I accidentally started a startup because I kept setting my friends up and they kept running off into the sunset together and falling in love. So I started a dating startup and it was really fun. I loved it, but I realized pretty quickly that I had no commercial nous whatsoever, and I didn't want to charge anyone anything. And when you've got employees, you need to charge people stuff. So after a few years, I stopped, and I ended up working as an undercover reporter for Panorama for the BBC, because of course, natural career path of what I had done, and that was wild and terrifying, but also fascinating. And then while I was there, I heard about free food at Google, and I'm very food motivated, so I applied to work for Google.
As you do.
And started there, and obviously Google owns YouTube, and I started in Google Trends, and then after a couple of years, I was like obsessed with YouTube. I already was before I started working there, and just spent more and more of my time focused on YouTube Trends. And then luckily, it's the kind of company that doesn't kind of force people to do things that they, might not be as interested in as something else. So they basically invented a job for me, which was great. And so I focused now on YouTube Trends, and it's amazing.
And when you arrived at YouTube, obviously the growth has been exponential, I imagine, in that period. Which phase of YouTube did you arrive in, and what was the state of play?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I've been there an inordinately long time. So it's more than 15 years, and YouTube's only been around for 21. So it was still relatively early days. It was still quite Wild Westy, there was just all kinds of madness happening. I loved that time though. The wonderful thing is that you still get crazy stuff happening on YouTube, of course. And so, but there's also the professional kind of side to it as well. That was, if I think about it, Charlie Bit My Finger was like massive the year that I joined. And I think there was still this kind of confusion in that people were like, what even is this platform? What are we going to do with it? And we still weren't making any money from it. So I can remember when someone would sell an ad campaign, the whole office would celebrate because we were like, oh my God, someone's actually bought something. And so, from that to where we are now as the kind of commercial entity that it is like a huge journey, but also in terms of like the difference in the type of content, the formats, everything. Just, it's been a crazy, crazy journey in just 21 years, really.
And have you got any data or insights into state of play today? Audience, sort of what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's so gargantuan that it feels kind of abstract to say the numbers, because what do they even mean when you say this? But it's almost, almost 3 billion monthly active users, which is like just crazy. It's like more than 200 billion hours watched every day just on TVs, where you're like, what? It's just, these numbers are totally meaningless at this stage, because it's such a staple part of so many people's lives that, yeah, I can't even get my own head around it.
It's pretty big. So
Pretty big.
your day today,
Yeah.
head of culture and trends for EMEA. What a cool job title that is. Like the LinkedIn post must have really done well. What does that entail? What do you do? What does your team do?
Yeah, so we are a funny team in that we are paid or funded by engineering. So we're actually kind of product side, but we also sit within marketing. So a lot of the work that we do is trying to help basically the engineers kind of tweak the algorithm every day. Like we uncover the newest trends, because you might think so much of this is done through machine learning, and tons of it is, but there needs to be a human element, of course. So we spend a lot of time like crunching data, looking at dashboards, etc., building tools. But then one of the side effects of that, of course, is that we get to see like what on earth is happening on the internet, because YouTube doesn't operate in a vacuum. You know, of course, we're impacted by everything else that's happening. So then we write lots of reports on the research that we do. I go and give talks in lots of different places, and that's really fun. And then the other aspect is kind of educating people in our own company, because as we just said, it is so huge that it's really hard to actually fully understand what is happening, even if you work at the company. So day to day, it can be very varied, from kind of sciencey stuff, but also artsy stuff, which is perfect for me. So I feel very lucky every day.
Love that. We use the word culture pretty much 15,000 times a day, because like our whole industry is obsessed with culture.
Yeah.
It's all we want to tap into. It's all we want to be. What does that mean to you? What does the word culture actually mean in your world?
So, I mean, obviously it's part of my job title, so I should have a pretty slick opinion on it, but I don't. I think for me, and I can chart this actually to the time that I've worked at YouTube, culture and people's notion of culture has shifted so radically, in that probably when I started, we were at the very cusp of like the whole ecosystem changing, in that culture used to be decided top down, and there were certain kind of traditional gatekeepers who would decide what our taste should be and what we should watch and what we should read and what we should listen to. And then suddenly with the internet, everything changed, and things that were popular were sometimes completely surprising. And so now culture much more than it used to be. So it used to be very passive, I guess, is what I'm saying. And now everyone is so much more active in culture, and it's so much more participative. And I think that's amazing. Like if you look at, you know, what it's like as a young person now, you know, when I was growing up, what I was consuming was totally decided by adults. But now as a young one, it's your friends and co-creation, and how you are taking something like whatever is your favorite thing and interacting with it and making content and sharing it with your friends, etc. So culture in a relatively short time has changed so much, and I think that is amazing, and it makes it so much more exciting. So at least my perspective. Some people might argue that culture, oh my God, what is happening to culture? But I think that's actually the wrong approach to it. We still have all the wonderful kind of traditional aspects to it, but it's now just much more vibrant.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, like we try and jump on cultural trends, and in our industry, we're always trying to be part of that conversation. But often it can be like the longevity of that process can diminish the outcome, because trends move so quickly.
So fast.
How quickly are you seeing trends kind of pop up? Like, how long are we going to care about this monkey in Japan, for example? Like, before it's gone.
Always care about punch. It's weird, isn't it? Because I think because of the way, partly to my last point, because we all have a much more direct relationship with culture and with trends and news and everything now, the cycle is so like relentlessly rapid that is really difficult. It's really difficult for me in my job to keep up with it. But you know, if you're working at a brand or a company who's trying to interact with it, my God, it can feel so overwhelming. And I think there's a whole range. Sometimes the trend or the news cycle is so short, like, within 2 days, it's over. Like, I did a presentation yesterday where I was talking about, Bad Bunny's Super Bowl halftime show. It's like, that was only 2 weeks ago. And it feels like, into history now. So it's crazy how fast things move. So I think there's an aspect where the stimulus of the trend can pass quite quickly, but actually often the community that is created around it and the shift in culture that has happened because of it can last for much longer. So I don't know, if you to take a kind of weird, daft example, when Gangnam Style happened, at the time, it was a whole meme and people were like replicating it and doing parodies or whatever. And, school playgrounds were full of people doing ridiculous horse dances. That didn't last for that long. But maybe this is giving Psy too much credit, but the downward trajectory of that has been, the incredible community that is the K-pop community. And you get to a world now where some of our biggest music stars come from K-pop. And that started with a song that most people couldn't understand, from a country that most people hadn't visited. And now you get to where we are now, and BTS getting back together, huge news cycles. So, I think the trends themselves hard to keep up with, but then the communities that those create actually are more long lasting.
That's really interesting. Obviously on YouTube, content creators usually benefit from consistency, longevity, world building, and long-term storytelling.
Yeah.
How have you seen content creators adapt to obviously culture moving quickly? They're trying to stay relevant. They're probably competing on multiple fronts, from TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube as well. How are they adapting to that world?
Yeah, we're seeing definitely this increasing approach to understanding that what your audience wants to watch depends on their need state. It's not that certain formats are confined to certain types of audience. So it would be wrong to assume that, if you're under 25, you only want short form. That's actually not true at all, and it doesn't play out in any of our data. So I think as creators and as brands, understanding actually that you should be perhaps less focused on the content itself and more on the community and what they want to hear and what they want to hear at different times. And I think one of the really lucky things about our platform, I guess, is that we get to see, what's happening in short form. We get to see what's happening in long form. We get to see what's happening in podcasts. We get to see what's happening in live streaming, because you can do everything on that platform. And increasingly, creators are really getting that too. And so you get creators who are experimenting with so many different formats now. And sometimes it really works for them and sometimes it doesn't. But I think, discoverability can come sometimes more easily through short form, for example. But then actually building that deep relationship with that audience often comes through long form. And it's worth investing in that because it's a very different kind of relationship that people have when they're seeking out the content rather than a feed-based, structure. So, yeah, I think that it's the good side of it is that there's so much flexibility now, and you can really cater to what makes sense for you at the time and for your audience at the time. But I also understand the flip side of that is oh my gosh, where do I begin? And how do I even do it? And should I be keeping, my short form on the same channel as my long form? And all these kind of questions that people have. And so it can make it feel a little bit daunting, I think.
Yeah, building on that, the Sidemen are particularly interesting because obviously they all started individual, then they became a group, they dominated YouTube, still are in so many ways.
Yeah.
But they've recently moved, a big part of their thing at the moment is the Inside game show, which they've moved to Netflix.
Yeah, outrageous. No, outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, it's a reverse of what everyone almost thinks is happening. Everyone thinks BBC creating programming for YouTube. What dynamic shifts does that create?
It's a funny one that I have been thinking about a bit because we see it happen, sometimes not just the Sidemen, it happens, Mr. Beast did something as well with Amazon and, Amazing Digital Circus that was huge on YouTube, then started looking at other platforms too. I think it kind of goes both ways in that for some people, they're going to find if they start doing stuff for Netflix, they're going to have a whole different audience. And so I totally understand why they might do that. You know, they've got an enormous audience on YouTube. I mean, it's really eye-watering to see like when you add up all their subscribers across all their different channels, it's like insane. And they've worked amazingly hard to say that. No like disparagement of them. They're phenomenal. But I also understand from their perspective that, you know, because they kind of grew up on YouTube, there's an excitement as well to be like, oh my God, you know, we're going to be on Netflix,
Mainstream,
which like,
yeah.
which funnily feels mainstream, even though they might get way more like people watching their stuff on YouTube. So it's this kind of perspective shift that I think is quite hard to get your head around. But, you know, all content and all experimentation and everything, I fully applaud, and I think well done to them for doing it. And they also knew. So I think one of the stepping stones for them making that decision was a company actually run by an amazing guy who used to work at YouTube, who I know and love, made a documentary with the Sidemen, and
Which you were in.
Which I was in. And
Small plug.
he decided to pitch that to different people, and that came from a lot of conversations that we had had with him while he was at YouTube of how huge they were. And Netflix bought it. So, you know, it was a commercial entity for him, and that documentary was like the #1 documentary on Netflix in the UK for over 3 months or something wild. And so I think for them, they were just fascinated by the fact that they made it because they were there, and also loads of new people had discovered them on that platform. So they're like, okay, let's further our reach. So yeah, makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, I imagine demographics a big part of that. Obviously, them probably individually wanting to mature a little bit away from being kids' TV, essentially via YouTube.
Yeah.
Do you see, with Gen Alpha especially, again, a big buzzword in our industry coming through, how are they influencing cultural trends? Do they drive cultural Gen Z, Gen Alpha, more so than millennial or further?
Gen X.
Like, how is that balance? Or can you still get trends further up the food chain, per se?
You definitely can. I think, you know, I find it quite exciting that when you get these like generational shifts, because anyone who's Gen Z, and I'm sure there are plenty of Gen Z in this audience, you feel so like, yeah, I'm it for a while, and then suddenly it's like,
you're not
out, take it over. And I think what we're seeing with Gen Alpha is they are quite different. And I mean, each generation is, and each generation is shorted exactly to what we were talking about earlier. Even in terms of like trend cycles affect generational cycles too, because the world changes so rapidly that you have to call a whole different type of behavior. What we're seeing with Gen Alpha is what I was saying up front about that it's like increased participation that we see in culture. It is extreme with Gen Alpha. Like because the other term for them that people use, which I always find a bit depressing, is iPad babies, of course. And so they were born literally into this world. Like, everyone who is in Gen Alpha is the most internet native person you will ever meet. And so for them, there is no barrier to participation. There's no barrier to sharing. They're fully immersed in this world, and they want to be part of it. And so you see them, making all sorts of bonkers stuff. And like, they're kind of like a lot of the creativity that we see with this really young generation is that it needs, and it makes sense for their age. It requires no context, or you can't even understand context if you tried. It's like you're fully into the action as soon as it starts. And I think part of that is by being influenced by huge creators like Mr. Beast, who he's very, very professional in what he makes, but it also doesn't require that much context, actually, if you watch his videos. You know, even an hour-long, incredibly highly produced video of his, you could watch without knowing anything really about him and you would understand it. And I think Gen Alpha have fully embraced that kind of style of content creation. And so I do think we see them influencing things. I think part of the fast pace is being exacerbated by them, because they like move on so quickly. But I also think, you know, because of the way that culture has been changing over the last few years, even older people are more willing to participate in things now. If you look at the demographics on different platforms, like, you know, look at the demographics on TikTok, which for a long time was kind of dismissed as being only teenagers, which was exactly the same thing as we had. You know, for years, we would go out and give talks and be like, well, do you know, actually 50% of the audience is this age or whatever. And you see actually the shift is huge, and just people embracing newer technology. Okay, yes, some aspects do skew younger, or some platforms do skew older or whatever, but I think there is much more of a blurring of people just trying different stuff now.
Is that you saying you know what 6'7" means? Because I do not.
I have to know.
Yeah, you have to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned TikTok there, double T, TikTok and Twitch, obviously entered the game over the last kind of 10 years, more recently, boomed.
Yeah.
People probably were worried about YouTube, probably internally and externally, about how that would impact your business, your viewership, and it seems you can all coexist together. I'm sure you're learning a lot from both platforms, because you've got kind of content formats that match both, right?
Yeah.
Have you got any insights into what they're teaching you at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think often people want to imagine that there's this like huge animosity between the different platforms. At least in my experience, that's just not the case. In fact, several people who work on my team are ex-TikTok, and you know, sometimes we get people who move the other way. Same for Twitch. I think actually I'm glad that TikTok came around, not just because I enjoy it as a consumer, but also because we remain, you know, the biggest video platform and blah, blah, blah. But it was a bit of an exciting kick up the bum to be like, you know, a whole new thing is happening, there's this whole new behavior. And what was funny is that people had made short form content on YouTube forever. You know, the first video that was uploaded to our platform was a short video of 19 seconds. So, and that remained for a really long time, and people always did, but we didn't have a specific place for it. We never had a feed, etc. So it made us look at kind of consumer behavior much more kind of forensically, I guess, where for quite a long time, we'd just been like, well, yeah, this is who we are. Do with it what you will. And and I think, you know, for the live streaming aspect from Twitch, again, yeah, more and more people are live streaming just anyway. So actually having, you know, multiple platforms to do it on, I guess, gives freedom of choice. Yeah, I think, you know, we learn from all sorts of different platforms. I mean, we learn from them maybe because they're newer, but we spent a long time learning from TV, because, you know, for many years, after when I was talking about it being kind of a bit Wild Westy at the beginning when I joined, you know, then there was suddenly this big effort of, oh, we have to, you know, professionalize, we are trying to compete with TV, so we need to, you know, make content of a higher quality, etc. And so I think we're always learning, and I think other platforms are always learning, and TV is now learning from other platforms, etc. So I don't think that is a bad thing at all. I think it is a really, really important thing, actually.
Yeah, streaming is so interesting, because hearing now the trends coming through, you've got Speed, Kai Cenat from the US, that culture especially.
Yeah.
Their fans want them always on.
Yeah.
They're streaming 24 hours, 48 hours, like sleeping on stream.
Yeah.
And then you've got TikTok, which is like, you get no likes from experience. If your TikTok is over like 8 seconds long.
Yeah.
Like, YouTube is very much in the middle. Usually you can play obviously in both. Where do you see it skewing? Do you think that longer form is going to start dominating, or?
Yeah, I mean, we ask ourselves this a lot. So when you look at the data, something that I find really interesting is, when we launched Shorts officially, like you look at the graph of how many views we're getting on videos that are under a minute long, for example. It's really like steep, and it's kind of crazy to look at. The way that views have built on short form is just insane. But then interestingly, we looked at the views on videos that are over an hour long, and they basically matched each other. And like the growth is really, really strong in long form as well. And, again, I said earlier, when people assume that young people have, no attention span, etc., and they're only watching short form, it's just not true, actually, because, there was third-party research that came out quite recently that said that on videos that are considered long form, which I think is like generally over 20 minutes long, the watch time from people under the age of 24 had increased by 10% year on year, which is a huge amount, like 10% growth in a year. And we see, there's a lot of discussion, you see it on all platforms now, of like young people wanting to unrot their brain and all of these kind of things. And a lot of that comes through kind of more intentional watching, which feels more aligned with long form. And you can get a depth there, of course you can, that you can't through short form. And so I do think, not to say, either or, I think both definitely can exist at the same time, and both can still be really popular. And I don't think it's true that one is going to, totally wipe out the other. I just think we need to understand that actually it is really that sense I said at the beginning of the need state of the audience, and that is shifting. And I know from my own behavior, sometimes I want to watch short form, but sometimes I'm like fully into a long video essay, which is just amazing and fully immersive. And I think, again, we ran this survey where people didn't know they were answering on behalf of YouTube, and we asked them if they had 30 minutes to spare, would they prefer to watch a series of short form videos or one piece of content that was 30 minutes long? And in people under the age of 24, twice as many said one piece of content that was 30 minutes long than short. The reality is, of course, that often people will open their phone and think they're only going to watch for like 5 minutes, and they end up spending that 30 minutes on watching short form. But the intention is very clear that people do want to feel that they're being more like mindful of their attention. So yeah, I don't know. I think everything can happen. Everything all at once.
Brilliant. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, brands on YouTube.
Yeah.
Is it a space they can win, like legitimately win, versus like, more authentic individual content creators, etc.? What are people doing that's helping them win, and what are people doing that is kind of making them fail?
Yeah, I definitely do think they can win. I think what makes the biggest difference is brands who don't try and use it as like a TV space, but they try and use it as a community space. And I think getting themselves into the minds of creators who are just, obviously so successful and are able to connect to their audiences so brilliantly, trying to understand that better as a brand, which is hard, I absolutely grasp that, is going to make people far more successful in all aspects. Like if you think about not just the video that you're uploading, but actually then being present in the comments. And there's a simple hack with that of when you are a brand and you comment either on your own video or other people's videos, you're then, especially if it's in reply to someone, that's bringing that person back to that video. It's getting their engagement, is helping the discoverability of that video itself, because it's giving signals to the algorithm that there's like repeat viewing and there's engagement, etc. So actually being present can reap such rewards. I mean, we're a brand. YouTube is a brand as well. So we are also trying to understand this. And when we look at how we produce content for the platform and how we show up in the communities, we recognize that's really hard. But I do think being, as much as possible, trying to be that like community-minded side, I think helps.
Yeah. Have you got any examples of people doing it well? Brands in particular?
Yeah. I mean, it is, having said you can win, it is depressingly quite hard to say who is. But I do think looking at what Nothing have been doing has been really, really like impressive, because they are absolutely thinking like creators, and they are understanding that yes, sometimes high production value works, but so does scrappier, more casual content, because that's the expectation sometimes of your audience. And actually being transparent, owning the conversation, recognizing what people are saying about you as a brand is so powerful. And that has really, really impressed me. And the fact that, you know, they've got over 1 million subscribers, it's hard to get 1 million subscribers. Like, I know creators who have been on the platform for years and years who are still nowhere near that. And so as a brand to get to that position, I think is really impressive. So I think for other brands trying to take those kind of lessons, you know, and you know, it can be quite risky putting your CEO out there, and it doesn't actually work for some people. And you know, to be really honest, we as a company tried to put our like head of YouTube on as a creator when we had this amazing woman, Susan Wojcicki, RIP. She was phenomenal, and like such a brilliant and kind and wise person, knew everything about creators, knew everything about the platform. And she started a channel to try and engage with the community. And it was really hard and it didn't go that well. And so this was a few years ago now, but I think the lessons that we would take from it is perhaps we should have been much more transparent in the same way that the Nothing guys is doing really well. And own your conversation and don't pretend like it's just daft. Like we know how the internet works now, and we know how conversations work, and so you've got to actually acknowledge it.
Yeah, I mean, my next question, I was going to put my corporate hat on and ask, while I've got the floor here, and ask if you can compete with LinkedIn in the way that people are putting their CEOs and recommending video content over written content, and can YouTube play a role in that? I think Carl from Nothing has done like an amazing job at being authentic. But obviously, time is hard to get that length of time with a CEO to do a 15-minute video per se. Yeah. Do you have any tips for anyone?
I mean, this is the first time I've ever been asked about LinkedIn as a competitor. That's amazing. But yeah. Yeah, I do think it can be a really, really effective tool. I think, you know, silly things like often when I interview people, if they're applying for jobs on my team, they'll have watched employees at YouTube make their videos about a day in the life of working there, and that's the sort of thing that really will make them want to work there, or maybe not. They might realize it's not the place for them. And I think those kind of things are not, you know, corporate backed. They're just people sharing their experience. And I think the danger is that when a corporate or corporation tries to do these things, unless they do it authentically, it just comes off so horrendously cringy that actually is worse than not doing anything. So I would say, yeah, it's great to experiment, but don't necessarily go into it too lightly. Like, do watch loads of other content first and actually understand what you're trying to do. Because, yeah, then it can be worse than nothing.
We've got one more question left, and then we'll put it to our lovely audience. Bring it right back. Yeah. What's kind of winning in culture at the moment? So you said Bad Bunny obviously did Super Bowl and he's blowing up. Is it talent driven? Or is it more wider, like football and stuff is always going to be in the mist? But
I mean, Bad Bunny's quite an interesting example because if you look at what's happening and what is winning, it is way more kind of global than it ever has been in terms of you know, he is American, but to do a Super Bowl show obviously was really considered crazily controversial that it was in Spanish, but that's just out of keeping with how culture works now to think that that was controversial, because actually when you look at, so at the end of every year we do an analysis of what the biggest like trending topics were in communities were in lots of different markets. And last year was the first time that across, and we have people, you know, in everywhere from, you know, South Korea to New York. It was the first time that we had real like confluence of topics, that there were so many of them were repeated. Whereas before, it in years to date, it had felt more local. And this kind of openness to global topics and other languages. And, you know, there's crazy stats now, especially for like Gen Alpha, they will happily watch stuff in other languages because they're so, you know, used to dubbing and subtitles or closed captions. Like, you know, that kind of thing is not weird for them. And so that I find really, really exciting, because actually, you know, for so long, really we've been dominated by things that came out of the US. And that's, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it makes it, you know, but it makes it really exciting when everything is so much more open. And that, I think, is important for people to bear in mind and to realize, because your audience can be so much broader than you think.
Yeah, I remember Mr. Beast, one of the things people say put him ahead of the curve is he translated all his videos ahead of everybody else. He put time and resources and
It's
opened up a
crazy.
whole world.
A whole world.
Yeah.
Like, you look at these lists I was just talking about that we do at the end of the year, and we look at which creators gain the most subscribers every year. Now, Mr. Beast has been the #1 creator for a really long time, so you wouldn't imagine that he was still the creator that was gaining the highest number of subscribers. But in multiple markets, he was in the top 10. In multiple markets, he was #1 still. And a lot of that is because absolutely he's very globally minded, and he gets it that his audience is way beyond what it might have been back in the day.